The storm howled through the frozen forest, snow burying everything in its path. But beneath a shallow hole in the snow, a desperate mother dog curled tightly around her 5 tiny puppies, shielding them from the deadly cold. Her body trembled with exhaustion. She had no food, no shelter, and the blizzard was growing stronger. She had done everything she could, but she was running out of time. Miles away, a man who had lost everything was about to make a decision that would change both their fates forever. What happened next was nothing short of a miracle. The wind howled through the frozen forest, rattling the skeletal branches of the leafless trees. Snow fell in thick, suffocating waves, swallowing the world in an endless white abyss. The air was sharp, cutting through the darkness like a cruel blade. No tracks remained on the ground. Everything was wiped clean by the relentless blizzard. It was a night where nothing should have survived. Yet, beneath a shallow hole in the snow, a mother dog lay curled around her 5 tiny puppies, shielding them from the deadly cold. Her body trembled from exhaustion. Her breath came in short, ragged puffs, frosting the air around her. She had dug this small den with paws that were now raw and bleeding, the sharp ice cutting deep into her pads, but she hadn't stopped. She couldn't stop. Her puppies needed her. She curled tighter around them, pressing their fragile bodies against her underbelly, trying to share what little warmth she had left. The smallest of the litter let out a weak whimper, barely audible over the storm. The sound sent a surge of fear through her chest. She licked the pup's tiny face, nudging it gently. "Stay awake, little one. Stay with me." Each of her puppies was a flickering flame in the freezing dark, and she was running out of strength to keep them lit. She had no food, no shelter, and the storm was growing worse. Miles away in the outskirts of town, Ethan Carter sat in his cabin, watching the storm rage outside. His fingers tapped idly against the rim of his coffee mug, now cold and untouched. The fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering shadows along the wooden walls of his home. Once, this place had been filled with laughter, with warmth. But those days were gone. Since then, he had kept to himself, fixing trucks in his small repair shop, avoiding people, avoiding attachments. But as he stared out into the storm, a strange unease stirred in his chest. Then the phone rang. The sharp sound broke through the quiet hum of the storm. Ethan frowned and reached for it, half expecting it to be a wrong number. No one really called him anymore. "Yeah? Ethan, it's Maggie." Ethan rubbed his temple. "Maggie, it's a blizzard out there. That dog is probably long gone by now." "I know, but it didn't look like she was just lost." Her voice was tight with concern. "She looked desperate. I think she might have puppies." That made Ethan pause. A stray dog wandering alone in this weather was one thing, but a mother dog with puppies? The thought unsettled him. He had seen it before. Dogs abandoned in the cold, left to fend for themselves. Most of them never made it through the winter. Something inside him, something buried under layers of grief and indifference, cracked just a little. "Where exactly did you see her?" he asked. Ethan glanced outside. The storm was getting worse. Visibility would be terrible, and the roads would be slick with ice. Everything in his mind told him to stay inside, to let nature take its course, but his gut told him otherwise. "I'll go check it out." "Be careful, Ethan." He hung up the phone and grabbed his coat. Back in the forest, the mother dog was losing the battle against the cold. Her body felt heavier by the minute, her muscles stiff and sluggish. She had not eaten in days, and the energy required to keep her puppies warm was draining the last reserves she had. The snow had crept into their little den, covering her puppies in a thin, icy layer. She nudged them closer, trying to block out the cold with her body. But she could feel it. They were getting weaker. She had to do something. Slowly she lifted her head, ears pricked, listening. The storm roared, but beyond it, she sensed something distant. A smell carried by the wind. Human. Her body tensed. Memories flashed. Rough hands, the slamming of a car door, the taste of gravel as she hit the ground. She had trusted humans once, but they had abandoned her. They had left her to die, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had her puppies. and if there was even the smallest chance that this human could help them, she had to try. Pushing herself up on shaking legs, she took a step forward, then another. She would not let them die here. The wind whipped against her fur as she forced herself forward, leaving the den behind. She moved through the deep snow, her body aching, every step an effort. She followed the scent, the distant warmth of something living, and then, through the white haze of the blizzard, she saw it. A light, and behind it, a figure, a man, moving through the snow. Her heart pounded. Was he friend or foe? She didn't know. But she had no choice but to find out. The wind screamed through the forest, carrying thick sheets of snow that blurred everything beyond a few feet. The mother dog moved cautiously, her paws sinking into the deep drifts, her body swaying from exhaustion. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her limbs ached, her fur was stiff with ice, and her breath came in short, labored puffs. She had been walking for what felt like hours, or maybe just minutes. It was impossible to tell anymore. The cold had stolen her sense of time, just as it was trying to steal her strength. She turned her head slightly, straining her ears against the roar of the storm. Behind her, barely visible through the thick snowfall, was the den she had dug for her puppies. She had covered them as best she could, using her own body heat to keep them warm before forcing herself to leave. It had been the hardest thing she had ever done. Her instincts screamed at her to go back, protect them, stay with them. But she knew if she didn't find food, if she didn't find some kind of shelter, they would freeze to death before the night was over. The storm was growing stronger. The mother dog forced herself forward, each movement slow, deliberate. She had never been this weak before. Hunger gnawed at her belly, her ribs pressing sharply against her thin coat, but she ignored it. She had to keep going. She kept her nose low, searching desperately for the scent of anything. Food, water, another animal. But the world was frozen solid, and the snow had buried any chance of survival beneath its merciless weight. Still, she kept moving. Her vision swam. Her body wanted to collapse. But she clenched her jaw and pushed forward. Then suddenly, a light. She stopped, her muscles locking in place. It was faint, barely more than a flicker in the distance, but it was moving. A glow of yellow, shifting between the trees. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. A human, but something held her in place. She lowered herself slightly, ears flicking forward, watching the figure move through the snow. He was slow, methodical, sweeping his flashlight back and forth as if searching for something. Her chest tightened. Was he looking for her? Or worse, had he come to finish what the others started? She bared her teeth slightly, but didn't growl. Not yet. Then the man stopped. His flashlight had landed on her. Her heart pounded. She could hear it in her ears, faster than the wind. The human didn't move. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Then, as if something inside her broke, she let out a short, sharp bark. Not a growl, not a warning. A plea, a desperate cry for help. A plea. He crouched down slightly, lowering himself onto one knee. His voice was calm, steady. The mother dog didn't move. Her fur bristled, her body stiff. She was still locked in place, her amber eyes flickering between Ethan and the darkness behind her. The wind howled between them, but she didn't so much as flinch. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was protecting something. Ethan could see it now. The way she stood, her weight subtly shifted backward, her muscles coiled. She wasn't just a stray lost in the storm. She was a mother standing guard, and she had something to lose. She didn't trust him. Her whole body screamed at her to run, to get as far away from this human as possible, but she couldn't, not yet. She stayed planted in the snow, her gaze locked onto the man. He was speaking, his voice low, measured, soothing. But she had heard human voices before. They had spoken softly when they fed her scraps, when they scratched behind her ears, when they let her rest inside their warm house. But then they had yelled. They had pushed her away. And finally, they had abandoned her. She still remembered the rough hands shoving her out of the truck, the shock of hitting the frozen ground, the sting of snow against her nose as she stumbled forward, trying to chase after the only home she had ever known. And then, nothing. She had waited for them to come back. She had lingered by the road for hours, listening, hoping, praying. But they never did. Now, here she was, fighting to keep her babies alive in a world that had already decided they weren't worth saving. She had no reason to believe this man was any different, and yet there was something in his voice, something that made her hesitate. He wasn't reaching for her. He wasn't forcing her to move. He was waiting. A gust of wind slammed into them, whipping snow into her face. She flinched, stumbling back a step, instinctively baring her teeth. A weak growl rumbled in her throat, though it barely held any force. She wasn't trying to scare him. She just didn't know what else to do. Ethan saw the way her muscles tensed, the way her lips curled slightly, but there was no true aggression behind it. She was torn, and she was exhausted. He didn't move. He didn't even breathe for a second, letting the storm settle between them. Then, slowly, he pulled his hands back and shifted slightly, taking a single step backward instead of forward. "Okay," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I get it. You're not just out here for yourself, are you?" The dog's ears twitched, but she didn't react otherwise. "You've got someone else to protect." Ethan let his gaze drift past her, scanning the shadows behind her, searching for any movement, any sign of what she was guarding. She didn't try to stop him, and that told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't about her. This was about them. She was standing between him and something far more precious than her own life, and Ethan realized then she wasn't deciding whether to run or fight. She was deciding whether to trust. The wind howled again, rattling the trees, but this time the dog did not react. Ethan remained still, his heartbeat steady, his breath slow. Another moment passed. Then, finally, she made her choice. She turned. It was slow at first, cautious, like she wasn't fully sure if she was making a mistake. But then she took another step, then another, her movements heavy but deliberate. She wasn't running. She was leading. Ethan exhaled, barely realizing he had been holding his breath. "All right," he murmured. Then, gripping his flashlight tighter, he followed. The snow had thickened, falling in relentless waves, making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the bare branches of the trees. Each step Ethan took felt heavier as he followed the mother dog deeper into the storm, his boots sinking into the knee-high snow. She moved with purpose, though her steps were sluggish, her body visibly drained. Every few paces, she would pause, glance back at him, and then press forward. It was as if she was making sure he was still following, still willing to go where she needed him to go, and then, finally, she stopped. Ethan nearly stumbled, catching himself as his flashlight beam flickered over the ground in front of her, a shallow hole in the snow. At first it looked like nothing, just another depression in the icy landscape. But then his eyes adjusted, and he saw them. 5 tiny bodies, huddled together in the frozen earth. His heart clenched. Puppies. They were small, too small for this kind of cold. Their fur was dusted with frost, their bodies curled up tightly against one another, their breathing faint, barely alive. Ethan dropped to his knees, ignoring the way the cold bit through his jeans. His hands moved without hesitation, his mind racing. "Oh God, they're too weak," he muttered. The mother dog let out a low whimper, stepping closer. Her body hovered over them protectively, but she did not stop Ethan as he reached forward. She had led him here. She had chosen to trust him. Now it was up to him to save them. His fingers trembled slightly as he unzipped his thick winter coat. He needed to get them warm, now. One by one, he carefully lifted the fragile puppies from the icy den, tucking them against his chest. They barely stirred. The cold had seeped deep into their tiny bodies, draining their strength, slowing their pulses. Ethan could feel the faint rise and fall of their breath against his skin, but it was too shallow, too weak. He had seen this before. Frostbite, hypothermia. He had pulled people out of burning buildings, rescued families from collapsed homes. He had watched life slip away too many times, but he wasn't about to let it happen again. He wrapped his coat around them, pulling them close, pressing his body heat against theirs. "Stay with me, little guys," he murmured, his voice tight. "You're not dying out here." The mother dog whined, shifting her weight anxiously. Her ears were flat against her skull, her eyes locked onto him. She was waiting, watching. She had brought him here. She had given him her trust. And now she was hoping he wouldn't fail her. Ethan stood up, adjusting his coat to secure the puppies against his body. The wind was getting worse. His visibility was shrinking by the second, and he knew they had minutes, maybe less, before the storm made it impossible to get back to his truck. "We have to move," he told the mother dog, stepping back. She hesitated. Ethan could see it in her posture, the conflict, the instinct to stay, to not leave the only home she had made for her babies. But there was no home here, only death. He took another step, shifting the puppies slightly. "Come on," he urged. "They need warmth, they need help. I can't do this without you." Still, she hesitated. Ethan's jaw clenched. Time was running out. Then, just as he was about to take another step, she moved, a decision made. She fell in step beside him, her legs shaking, her eyes flicking between him and the tiny forms hidden within his coat. They were in this together now. The wind had turned vicious, screaming through the trees like a living thing. Ethan could barely see his own hands in front of him, let alone the path he had taken to get here. Each step was a battle. His breath was coming in short bursts, the weight of the puppies making it harder to move through the deep snow. They had to make it. They were almost halfway back when Ethan felt a sudden tug on his pant leg. His body jerked instinctively. He stumbled, his heart leaping into his throat as he twisted around. The mother dog had stopped. She wasn't following anymore. She was standing perfectly still, her mouth gently clamped around his jeans. Her eyes were locked onto something in the snow. Ethan frowned, breathless. What? Then he saw it. A tiny, unmoving shape, half buried beneath the ice. A sixth puppy. His stomach dropped. How had he missed it? It was so small, even compared to the others. It had been hidden, buried just enough that in the chaos of scooping up the rest, he hadn't seen it. It wasn't moving. His chest tightened. "God!" he whispered, already moving. He dropped to his knees, frantically brushing away the snow. His hands wrapped around the frozen body, lifting it from the icy grave. No breath, no movement. It was completely limp in his hands. The mother dog let out a heart-wrenching sound, somewhere between a whimper and a cry. Ethan didn't think. He pulled the puppy against his chest, pressing it into the warmth of his coat. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, little one. Don't do this." Nothing. He squeezed his eyes shut, his breath ragged. Not again. He had lost too much already. He wasn't about to let this life slip through his fingers, not when he had come this far. "Come on, fight," he whispered. He rubbed the puppy's tiny body gently, trying to stimulate warmth, trying to wake up whatever spark of life was still buried in there. Seconds ticked by, then a tiny breath. Ethan felt it before he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible shudder. His eyes snapped open. Another breath, weak but there. "Good," Ethan exhaled, his body sagging in relief. "Good job, kid." The mother dog was still watching him, frozen in place, as if she was afraid to hope. He turned toward her, nodding. "I've got them," he told her. "All of them." She stared for another long moment. Then, as if finally believing him, she stepped forward and pressed her cold, wet nose against his coat. It was a gesture of trust, of gratitude, of understanding. Ethan held the last puppy close, stood up, and turned toward where his truck waited somewhere in the blizzard. "We're going home." The final stretch was brutal. Ethan pushed through the last few 100 yards, his muscles burning, his chest tight with exertion. His truck was a blur in the snow, barely visible until he was nearly on top of it. He wrenched the door open and climbed inside, the warmth of the interior hitting him like a wall. He barely had time to set the puppies down before the mother dog leapt in after him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She chose to stay. Ethan slammed the door shut, sealing them in from the storm. The puppies let out faint whimpers, curling against one another. The mother dog nudged each of them, then settled against them, her body curling protectively around her babies. Ethan sat back in his seat, breathless, heart still hammering. He had found them. He had saved them. And for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel so alone. The warmth inside the veterinary clinic was an almost jarring contrast to the freezing storm outside. The stark white walls, the scent of antiseptic, and the soft hum of medical equipment created an atmosphere of urgency and care. Ethan stood near the examination table, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his body still cold from the hours spent in the snow. The mother dog sat nearby, her body curled protectively around her puppies, watching everything with wary eyes. Anna, a young veterinarian in her early 30s, moved quickly as she examined each of the tiny bodies. Her fingers were gentle but firm, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. She had seen cases like this before, animals pushed to the brink by cruel circumstances, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to care for them. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Will the others make it?" Anna nodded but didn't look entirely relieved. "They're weak, but they have a chance. Their temperatures are low and they're dehydrated, but with warmth, fluids and rest, they should pull through." Anna crouched beside her, reaching out a hand cautiously. The mother dog tensed but didn't growl, her eyes flicking between Anna and her litter. "She's been through hell," Anna said softly, observing the scars on her paws, the raw patches on her nose. "She's been walking for miles, probably for days, with barely anything to eat. It's a miracle she kept them alive this long." Ethan felt a knot form in his chest. He had already known that, but hearing it out loud made it feel even more real. This dog had fought harder than anyone he had ever seen, and yet someone had thrown her away like she was nothing. Then Anna frowned, her fingers lightly brushing against the mother dog's ear, and she suddenly froze. "Wait a second," she muttered. Her gaze sharpened as she tilted the dog's head slightly, inspecting a faint marking on the inner side of her ear. It was barely visible beneath her fur, but it was there. A tattoo. Ethan took a step closer. "What is it?" Anna didn't look up. "Give me a second." She pulled out a file, flipping it open, scanning the contents with growing tension. Then her jaw tightened, and she turned to face him. This dog, this German shepherd, she was here. Ethan blinked. "What?" Anna set the file on the counter and pointed at the first page. It was a medical record, dated a little over a week ago. The name at the top wasn't a pet's name, just an identification number. The notes were sparse, but they were enough. A routine checkup, a quick exam, no major injuries. The owner listed Martin Reynolds. Ethan's stomach turned. Who the hell is Martin Reynolds? Anna's expression darkened. "A backyard breeder, one of the worst. He's been in and out of trouble for running an illegal puppy mill just outside of town. He breeds dogs, mostly German shepherds and huskies, keeps them in horrible conditions, forces them to have litter after litter until their bodies can't take it anymore." She exhaled sharply. "Then, when they're no longer profitable, he gets rid of them, dumps them like trash." Ethan clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He looked at the mother dog who was still watching them cautiously. "So that's what happened to her. He used her to breed, and when she couldn't have any more puppies, he threw her away." His voice was low, tense, filled with barely restrained anger. Anna nodded grimly. "And she must have been pregnant when he dumped her. She had her litter in the wild, in the middle of a snowstorm. She wasn't supposed to survive, and neither were they." He inhaled sharply. "If we hadn't found them," Anna cut in, her voice laced with certainty, "they wouldn't have made it through the night." Silence filled the room. Ethan looked at the mother dog again, something in his heart twisting. She hadn't just been wandering. She hadn't been lost. She had been fighting for her life, for her babies, and still, despite everything, despite every reason she had to hate humans, she had led him to them. She had trusted him. And now she was staring at him again, her golden eyes unwavering, as if waiting to see what he would do next. Ethan turned back to Anna. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. "If we don't do something, he's going to keep doing this. More dogs, more litters, more suffering. Anna nodded. We've tried before. The authorities have been keeping an eye on him, but without solid proof, they can't shut him down. He covers his tracks well. Anytime he's been caught with neglected animals, he claims they were strays he found and was trying to rehome. Ethan gritted his teeth. Not this time. Anna frowned. Ethan? Anna studied him for a moment, then nodded. If we do this, we have to be careful. He's been in this business for years. He knows how to avoid getting caught. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we make sure he doesn't... The mother dog let out a soft huff, her body relaxing slightly for the first time. Ethan wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or relief, but it didn't matter. She was safe now, her puppies were safe, and whoever had done this to her was going to pay. The clinic had become a temporary sanctuary. The warmth of the recovery room contrasted starkly with the brutal cold outside. The mother dog lay curled on a soft blanket, her eyes half closed, her body finally at rest. Her puppies were nestled against her belly, their breathing steady and strong. They had been weak on the edge of survival, but after hours of warmth, fluids, and careful monitoring, they had stabilized. Even the smallest one, the one Ethan had nearly lost in the snow, was showing signs of improvement. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the snowfall through the glass. The storm had passed, but something inside him still churned. He had spent the last few hours going over everything with Anna, discussing what needed to be done next. They had the medical records, the photographic evidence, and now they had a mission. Martin Reynolds had gotten away with this for too long. Ethan wasn't going to let it happen again. He turned as the door opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside, brushing snow off his jacket. James Turner, a local animal rescue officer, had arrived. His expression was serious as he nodded toward Ethan. Anna filled me in. We need to move fast. Ethan's jaw tightened. We know where he is. James nodded. His property's about 15 miles out of town, just off the old highway. He's careful, keeps most of the dogs in a barn on the far end of the property, away from the road. The place is fenced in, security cameras, locked gates. He knows what he's doing. Ethan glanced at the mother dog, who was still watching them, her amber eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. He had seen fear in her before. Now there was something different. Resolution. She had survived. She had saved her puppies. But there were others out there. Others who weren't as lucky. Ethan turned back to James. Let's go. The drive to Martin's property was long and silent. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles tight around the steering wheel. James sat beside him, checking his phone, coordinating with law enforcement. They couldn't just storm in without cause, but the evidence Anna had gathered, combined with Ethan's first-hand account, was enough to get them inside legally. As they pulled onto the dirt road leading to the property, Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The place was a prison for dogs. Fences stretched across the perimeter, enclosing a large barn and a dilapidated house. A no trespassing sign was nailed to the gate. The windows of the house were dark. Ethan turned off the engine, and they stepped out. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they approached the gate. James reached for the intercom, but barely had time to press the button before a porch light flicked on, and a figure emerged from the house. Martin Reynolds. He was in his late 50s, stocky, with a thick coat draped over his shoulders. His face was lined with years of hard living, his eyes sharp and suspicious as he stepped onto the porch. "You lost?" he called out, his voice rough. James stepped forward, his badge visible. "Martin Reynolds." Martin smirked. "Who's asking?" "James Turner, Animal Welfare Enforcement. We received a report about possible neglect on your property. We'd like to take a look." Martin snorted, folding his arms. "Neglect? That's rich. I take better care of my dogs than half the people in this town take care of their kids." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and even. "That's so. Then why did I find one of your dogs half dead in the snow with her newborn puppies?" Something flickered in Martin's expression. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before recovering, his smirk widening. "You're gonna have to be more specific, pal. I got a lot of dogs." Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen, then turned it toward Martin. The image was clear, the mother dog, curled in the snow, her puppies shivering against her. Martin's smirk vanished. Ethan watched the color drain from the man's face. He hadn't expected them to find her. "You dumped her," Ethan said, his voice quiet but full of barely restrained anger. "You thought she'd die out there. You didn't even bother to check." Martin took a step back, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You got no proof that dog came from here." Anna had anticipated that. Ethan swiped to the next image, the mother dog's ear, the tattoo, the medical records from Martin's own visit to the clinic. "You want to keep lying?" Ethan challenged. For a moment, Martin said nothing. Then, with a scoff, he shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "All right, so maybe she got out. So what? I ain't responsible for what happens after that." James pulled out a clipboard. "Actually, you are. And if she was abandoned intentionally, that's a crime. But that's not all we're here for. We have reason to believe you have animals on this property that are being kept in inhumane conditions. We need to inspect your facility." Martin's face darkened. "You got a warrant?" James held up the paperwork. "We do now." Martin's nostrils flared, but he didn't resist. He turned sharply, muttering curses under his breath as he unlocked the gate. "Fine, let's get this over with." Ethan and James exchanged a glance before following him inside. The barn smelled of damp straw and unwashed animals. As soon as they stepped in, Ethan's stomach twisted. Rows of cages lined the walls, each one containing a dog. Some were too thin, their ribs visible beneath patchy fur. Others had dull eyes, their spirits clearly broken. A few whimpered as they approached, pressing themselves against the backs of their cages. Ethan felt his fists clench. James walked past him, scanning the rows. "Jesus," he muttered, "these dogs are in terrible shape." Martin shrugged. "They're fine. They eat, they drink. What else do they need?" Ethan turned on him, barely restraining himself. "They need care. They need warmth. They need to not be locked in a cage until they can't even stand on their own." James had heard enough. He pulled out his radio. "We need backup. We're confiscating the animals immediately." Martin's face turned red. "You can't just take my dogs." "Watch me!" James shot back. As if on cue, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights flashed against the falling snow. Martin turned to Ethan, his jaw clenched. "You think you're some damn hero," he sneered. "You think you can come in here and ruin my business?" Ethan stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out his phone again, this time showing a different image, the mother dog, not in the snow, not starving, but curled around her puppies in the warmth of the clinic, safe and loved. "You already lost," Ethan said simply. Martin didn't have a response. By the time the police finished, Martin Reynolds was in handcuffs. The barn was emptied, the dogs taken into emergency rescue. As Ethan watched the last cage being carried out, something inside him finally settled. It wasn't just about one mother dog anymore. It was about all of them. He exhaled and turned towards the truck, where James was finishing up paperwork. "You did good tonight," James said. Ethan glanced up at the sky, the storm clouds clearing. "So did she," he murmured. The house was warm, filled with the soft crackling of the fireplace and the rhythmic breathing of 6 tiny bodies curled up on a thick blanket. The mother dog lay stretched out near the hearth, her golden-brown fur illuminated by the flickering firelight. Her puppies were nestled against her, their bellies full, their small chests rising and falling in peaceful sleep. Ethan sat in his armchair, a mug of coffee in his hands, watching them. It had been a long time since his home had felt like this. Alive. For years, it had been nothing but a place to sleep, a shelter from the world he had withdrawn from after losing his wife and daughter. The rooms had been too quiet, the walls too cold, the emptiness too heavy. But now that silence was filled with the soft sighs of sleeping dogs, the occasional whimper from a dreaming pup, and the gentle tap of a wagging tail against the floor. It had been 2 weeks since they had rescued the mother dog and her litter. 2 weeks since Ethan had made a decision that changed everything. He hadn't planned on keeping them. At first, he had convinced himself that this was temporary, that once they were healthy, he would find them homes. But as the days passed, and he watched the mother dog begin to trust him as he woke up every morning to tiny paws scrambling across the floor, he knew they were home. When he had told Anna, she had only smiled knowingly. "I figured," she had said. "She chose you first, you know." And she had. That night in the snow, when she could have run, when she could have turned her back, she had chosen to trust him. And in return, she had given him something he hadn't realized he had been missing. A reason to wake up, a reason to care again. He had named her Luna, and as she lay there by the fire, surrounded by her puppies, she let out a soft sigh of contentment, as if she too had finally found peace. Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee, glancing out the window. Snow was falling again, blanketing the world in white. Somewhere out there, the past still existed. The grief, the pain, the ghosts of what he had lost. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking back. He looked down at Luna, reaching out to run his fingers gently over her fur. She stirred slightly, blinking up at him before resting her head against his knee. His chest tightened, not with sadness, but with something new, something warm. Family wasn't just blood. It was who you chose you. Ethan had spent years believing his was gone forever, but tonight, as he sat by the fire with 6 tiny heartbeats resting safely under his roof, he knew the truth. He had found it again, and this time he wouldn't let it go.